Retrofit solutions. So today we're focusing on solutions for heavy goods vehicles, including refuse collection vehicles. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. We've set this up to raise awareness of the low emission zones and to prepare businesses that operate HGVs and RCVs for the introduction next year. My name's Heather Quinn. I'm Programme Manager at the Energy Saving Trust, working on both the Low Emission Zone Support Fund and the Retrofit funds. But firstly, a bit of housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded. We'll be sharing it on the Energy Saving Trust website shortly after. All attendees, your microphones and cameras are turned off, unfortunately, so we can't see or hear you, but you can still communicate with us. So you can use the chat function to the right of your screen. And please do post any questions that you have through the chat throughout the webinar. We will try our best to answer these towards the end of the session in our Q&A. So over the next hour or so, you'll hear from myself on behalf of Energy Saving Trust on support available to HGV drivers and businesses in Scotland. But it's not just me, I'm joined by some great speakers today as well. You'll hear from Will Heckler from Aberdeen City Council and Dom Callaghan from Glasgow City Council, who will both be providing an overview of their low emission zone and the proposed plans. We also have Amir Rauf from the Clean Vehicle Retrofit Accreditation Scheme, also known as CIVRAS, who will discuss the retrofit solutions that are currently available for HGVs and RCVs. And then we'll finish up with our Q&A session. So as I said, please do send us through your questions. So firstly, we'll cover what support's available from Energy Saving Trust. And just to give you a bit of a background into the Energy Saving Trust and what we do, we're an independent organisation. So we work to address the climate emergency and we work with everyone to achieve our mission. So we empower households, millions of householders every year to make better energy choices. We deliver transformative programmes working with governments and we support businesses with strategies, research, assurance and communications, enabling them to play their part in a sustainable future. And in Scotland, we're funded by Transport Scotland, an agency of the Scottish Government, to deliver a number of programmes, whether it's to increase the uptake of electric vehicles, to reduce the reliance on passenger cars and encourage businesses and individuals to shift towards shared and active travel options, and of course, helping to prepare businesses and households for the introduction of Scotland's 4 planned low emission zones. So the reason that we're all here today is low emission zones are coming. So they're set to be introduced in Aberdeen, Glasgow, Edinburgh and Dundee next year in 2022. And low emission zones are similar to the clean air zones you might have heard of throughout the rest of the UK, including Bath and Birmingham, and also the ultra low emission zones in London. The key objective of low emission zones is to protect public health by improving local air quality. And the zones are really effective. So according to Clean Earth, within its first year, London's ultra low emission zone saw a 37% reduction in pollution levels that they would have had without the zone in place. And air pollution, it's a major public health concern. So in 2019, the World Health Organization published that air pollution and climate change were the 2 greatest threats to human health at the time. And the Clean Air for Scotland strategy highlights that within the UK, air pollution is estimated to cost the NHS around £15 billion a year because of the associated health impacts. That's not to mention the ongoing costs of further economic impact as a result of loss of time in work, for example. And in Scotland, fine particulate matter was associated with around 2,000 premature deaths. So air pollution can increase your risk of heart and respiratory diseases, asthma, chances of stroke, and even certain cancers. And it's not just the general public that are at risk, drivers are also at risk as well. So drivers sitting in their vehicle are exposed to these pollutants while they're driving, especially when they're sitting in slow moving traffic with the window down. And that type of driving, it's common when driving in city centres and urban environments. So as such, low emission zones are focused on restricting the access of the most polluting vehicles on our roads in areas of high pollution levels to try and improve air quality. And the restrictions are set based on the Euro standard of your vehicle, with those older, more polluting vehicles facing a penalty if they were to enter the zone. So for diesel vehicle, the proposed standards for the low emission zones in Scotland would allow a Euro 6 or equivalent vehicle to enter penalty free. And on that note, in Scotland, our low emission zones will differ to the zones in London, for example, which issue a daily charge to vehicles that enter. So in Scotland, non-compliant vehicles would be issued a penalty rather than a charge every time they enter the zone, but then that penalty could increase for repeated visits, so potentially increasing the cost to you or your business. And more information on the standards and the penalties can be found on the Low Emission Zone Scotland website, and we'll send you all the links and information following the webinar. But in terms of the changes you can make, what support's available for you to access? So in Scotland, through funding provided by Transport Scotland, energy saving trusts are able to offer micro businesses and sole traders funding to help them prepare for the low emission zones. So there's the Low Emission Zone Retrofit Fund. We provide up to 80% grant funding available towards the cost of retrofit solution for RCVs and HGVs. And that's up to a maximum of £16,000 available per vehicle, and you can apply for a maximum of 3 vehicles per organisation. It is available to micro businesses and sole traders only, but this is a good option to help kind of extend the life of your vehicle without increasing exhaust emissions. And we only fund solutions that will reduce your vehicle's exhaust emissions to an acceptable standard for entry into the low emission zones. Then the Low Emission Zone Support Fund, we offer £2,500 grant for the safe disposal of non-compliant vehicles. Again, available to micro businesses and sole traders, but by disposing of your vehicle at a registered authorised treatment facility, you're removing older, more polluting vehicles from the roads and from the used vehicle market as well. So that can help businesses and individuals focus on moving towards cleaner alternatives. If you're not a micro business or sole trader, there is other funding and advice support available from Energy Saving Trust. So we have the low carbon transport loan, where interest-free loans are available for up to £120,000 per organisation for electric or plug-in hybrid HGV options. There's an increasing number of electric models becoming available, and that's only expected to grow in the coming years. But if you do go down this route, there's further grant funding for the installation of charge points on your business premises to support that electric vehicle, and that can help you charge overnight or whilst parked at your business centre. If you're unsure of what options to choose, we offer free sustainable transport advice and fleet reviews, and we can look across all business vehicles and sustainable transport options for you. We will make the best recommendations to help your business reduce its exhaust emissions and also save you money. I've only specified funding available to HGV vehicles, but if your business operates other vehicle types, please do get in touch with us or visit our website and we can provide further information on that for you. And all this information that I've just said about the funding will be sent to you following the webinar as well. And just to finish off, so by taking action and exploring ways in which your business can reduce your exhaust emissions, you should see the following benefits. So reduction in the running cost of your vehicle. And by making your vehicle more efficient, this typically reduces the amount of fuel that you use and therefore hopefully your running costs. Not to mention, you're then able to avoid facing future costs of penalties within low emission zones if you were to do nothing. You'll also be reducing your exhaust emissions of all your vehicles, including greenhouse gases. This causes climate change. So therefore, you're reducing your business's environmental impact. And in conjunction, you'll also contribute to the improvement of air quality within the areas that you operate, making them nicer places to live and work. And further, by doing so, will not only help reduce increasing health concerns amongst the general public, but will contribute to the quality of life, improved quality of life for your customers, your staff, and even yourself. So I will now hand over to Will Heckler from Aberdeen City Council to hear about the city's low emission zone plan.
Heather, I'll just share my screen.
Perfect.
Is that visible? Yeah.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, I'll just. Okay, thank you everyone. My name's Will and I work for Aberdeen City Council's transport team, and I'm currently managing the appraisal and implementation of our low emission zone. So I've just got a few slides for you today, just outlining where we are in that process, what we've done to date, and what the next steps are. So first of all, just a brief overview of air pollution in Aberdeen. Generally, air quality is good here, but even with the opening of the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route in 2019, we have instances of exceedances of the air quality, air pollution objective levels, mostly in the city centre. And I'm not sure how familiar people on the call are with Aberdeen, but this area where I've got my cursor on is kind of the main city centre street. So you can see King Street, Union Street, Holborn Junction are our main areas of concern, where the red dots indicate a level of pollution beyond what's what the current legal limits are. So yeah, so that's our main shopping street, where there's obviously lots of people living and working and spending time in, which is why the air pollution there is a concern. And we've also got areas of concern down on Virginia Street, Market Street. It's a big shopping centre there. So yeah, yeah, the city centre is our main area of concern. Hence the reason why we're looking at a low emission zone in the city centre. So like the other cities in Scotland pursuing low emission zones, we've been following the National Low Emission Framework process that was established by the Scottish Government to help us determine the optimum low emission zone for Aberdeen. Last year we developed 8 options that went out for public and stakeholder engagement. It was really 4 options with a variant of each option, I suppose, which included or excluded Denburn Road. And even if you're not familiar with Aberdeen, these titles are not particularly important. I suppose it's just the main point here is that there was a scale of options, I suppose, where option 1 was the smallest option and option 4 was the largest. And I'll show some images of these in a second. So these went out for consultation last year, and at the same time they've been going through the traffic modelling and air quality assessment process, as well as wider appraisal to try and help us determine what the optimum LEZ is for Aberdeen. So again, I know these perhaps aren't showing too clearly in your screens, but this slide just, I suppose, shows the different scales of options we looked at. So our first option, option 1, was a fairly small option, quite a tight core in the city centre, gradually increasing in size up to option 4, which was a much larger area. And I mentioned Denburn Road as the variant of each of these options. That's a street that runs underneath the city centre, but it's quite an important north-south route. So each of the options we looked at included or excluded Denburn Road as the kind of variants of each of the options. Well, yeah, as well as the public consultation, we've been appraising these options against a range of criteria and starting to sift them out depending on their performance, with the main issues being their impact on traffic, their impact on air quality, public acceptability, and also the city centre, making sure the city centre remains a healthy and accessible area, especially just now as a lot of our businesses are struggling with the impact of COVID, and we're all working hard on the recovery of that. So fairly early on in the process, it was clear that options 2 and 3 didn't meet many of the objectives. They weren't particularly acceptable to members of the public, and they didn't perform particularly well in traffic terms, so they were sifted out on that basis. Option 1, the smallest option, and option 4, the largest options, were the options that received most support amongst the public. They also both performed fairly well in traffic modelling terms, but as you can imagine, they had quite different impacts on air quality, with option 1, the smallest option, obviously having a more limited impact compared to the larger option, option 4. However, there were concerns expressed about option 4, mainly in relation to that last point there about the city centre, the accessibility of the city centre. Because option 4 covered such a large area, there was really only one city centre car park that would actually be accessible to non-compliant vehicles. And as I say, there was a concern around that maybe we were being too restrictive in terms of city centre access, especially at the moment when our businesses are looking towards COVID recovery, and we want to encourage people to come to our city centres as much as they can. So in response to this, we developed this a hybrid option, option 5, which I'll pop on the screen now. And that really was an effort to, I suppose, combine the best of the smaller and the larger options. So it's a fairly small area, but it's been extended out to include some additional streets, some traditional through routes of the city, just to try and maximise the air quality benefits of that option without stretching the low emission zone itself into areas where you know, a large number of residents and businesses would be affected, even though they're not particular areas of air quality concern. So this was the option that our councillors agreed to take forward for consultation, and we went out for public and stakeholder consultation over the summer on this option. And I'll get on to the outcomes of that consultation in a second, but just to run through, I suppose, some of the findings of this option in the traffic model. It performs relatively well. Obviously, traffic levels reduced within the low emission zone, and there's some displacement of traffic out with the zone, but nothing too concerning at this stage that we can't mitigate against. But we have committed to continuing to monitor traffic levels and the impacts of the low emission zone as traffic perhaps picks up again once, you know, as we emerge from the pandemic and once the LEZ is operational. Yeah, I suppose inevitably some distances and journey times will increase for non-compliant vehicles, but generally congestion is predicted to decrease, and combined with some city centre traffic reduction measures, we are anticipating some quite drastic reductions in air pollution as a result of the low emission zone. And as that slide says, an 87% reduction is anticipated on Union Street, which, as I say, is our main street through the city centre. So that's quite significant and quite a hopeful result for us. So, taking the outcomes of the recent consultation, we've had a look at the some of the main concerns that were raised and whether the boundary perhaps needs to change as a result of that. Perhaps the simplest and easiest one to address first of all was a concern that was raised by the Trinity Shopping Centre in Aberdeen. They quite fairly, I suppose, pointed out that they're the only shopping centre within the low emission zone, and their car park and servicing area are included, and they felt this was you know, unfair to them and perhaps anti-competitive compared to the you know, the other shopping centres not being that situation. So they requested that we consider removal of their access from the low emission zone. And as you can see, this is the sort of the change that we're looking at the moment, and I think that's one that can be accommodated fairly easily just by a slight tweak to the boundary. And because through routing is still prevented through that area, I think this is one that we can, as I say, accommodate without too many impacts on the wider air quality. So that's one that we're looking at the moment. I suppose a slightly trickier change that we've also been, we've also felt the need to address following the consultation outcomes is in relation to our eastern boundary. Again, I'm not sure how familiar people are with Aberdeen, but the option we took out for consultation included East North Street and Commerce Street within our low emission zone. And anyone familiar with Aberdeen will know that this route here down King Street, along East North Street, down Commerce Street, it is one of the main access routes through the city centre, and more importantly is a key access route to Aberdeen Harbour from the north. And there was a concern raised during consultation that if that route to the harbour from the north was closed off to non-compliant vehicles, that would encourage a shift in non-compliant vehicles to the east of that, along streets that are residential streets and, you know, along the beachfront, which are certainly not places we particularly want a large shift of goods vehicles, either heavier or light goods vehicles. So yeah, that was I suppose a legitimate concern that we took on board following the consultation, and have started to look at different variations of. So one of the options that we're looking at the moment is taking East North Street and Commerce Street out of the LEZ. That should allow access to the harbour from the north, but still prevent through routing of non-compliant vehicles. So that's one that will have maybe certain air quality implications, but by keeping that through route closed to traffic, we think that's probably within the acceptable limits. The other option we're looking at is taking out that entire eastern corridor, so taking East North Street, Commerce Street, Virginia Street and Market Street out of the low emission zone, and that provides a route right around the LEZ for all vehicles, and keeps, again, the harbour fully accessible. That one I think will perhaps struggle in air quality terms, given that Virginia Street and Market Street are areas of high pollution levels. And I think, you know, the emerging modelling is starting to show that if we do keep that entire route open, we really are shifting quite a lot of non-compliant traffic onto that route, because of the LEZ restrictions and because of some of the wider restrictions we're looking to implement in the city centre. So that one might be trickier to progress on air quality terms. But in any case, our next step is to take the modelling outcomes of the different variations to our councillors and get agreement from them as to which option we proceed with at the next stage of the process. Just a quick word on scope. I think similar to all the Scottish local authorities, we're looking at a low emission zone that encompasses buses, all cars, light goods vehicles and heavy goods vehicles, and obviously following the Scottish Government emission standards that were discussed earlier, so Euro 6 for diesel vehicles and Euro 4 for petrol vehicles. And I think that's consistent with what the other cities in Scotland are doing. Our low emission zone on the 30th of May 2022, and we're proposing a 2-year grace period during which enforcement won't take place. So that'll apply to both residents and non-residents, so a uniform grace period for all vehicles. And that means that enforcement would commence on the 30th of May 2024. I'll finish up just again on next steps. So as I mentioned, if our councillors are amenable to our boundary revisions and they're happy with that boundary going forward to the next stage of the process, we hope to launch that next stage on the 1st of November when we formally publish the scheme, and that triggers a 28-day objection period where any formal objections to the scheme can be submitted. We'll obviously, depending on the volume and content of those objections, we hope, assuming there are no insurmountable objections, to submit our final scheme to Scottish ministers late this year or early next year. And as I mentioned, that will allow us to formally declare the scheme in May 2022 and allow the LEZ to become fully operational and enforceable from 2024. So that's just a quick rundown of where we are in the process, what we've done so far and what our next steps are, which I hope is useful for you. Yes, happy to take any questions at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks very much, Will. So next up, we've got Dom Callaghan, who'll be giving an overview of Glasgow City Council's plan. Over to you, Dom.
Thanks very much, Heather. I'll just share my screen. And hopefully you can all see the screen now. As I said, I'm Dom Callaghan. I work for Glasgow City Council, responsible for air quality and the development of the low emission zone. And whenever I give one of these talks, I always like to start off with this slide, which shows what Glasgow used to be like and the real problems that it used to have with air pollution. And back in those days, most of the air pollution was caused by heavy industry or domestic heating, and it basically produced pollution that you could chew. But in 1956, the Clean Air Act came in, and the graphs at the top show the dramatic improvement that was produced as a result of that. Black smoke and sulfur dioxide concentrations have fallen consistently, so much so that we don't really even measure those pollutants anymore. But just because you can't see pollution anymore doesn't mean that we don't still have a real problem. And pollution from road transport is now really the major source of pollution in most cities, including Glasgow. And that's taken over from that industrial and domestic sources that we used to see. But to know the extent of the problem, we really have to measure it. And that's one of the main duties of any local authority, to measure air pollution in their areas. And we've got an extensive monitoring network in Glasgow. And from this map, you can see the green dots. We've got 10 automatic monitoring stations, and that's supplemented by over 100 diffusion tubes, which gives us that real spatial information of where the pollution is in the city. And again, what is pollution like in Glasgow? And like, well, I might surprise you by saying it's generally pretty good. The graph on this slide shows our automatic monitoring stations for nitrogen dioxide. And you can see that the majority of the stations in the city all record levels below the objective. The black line in the graph shows the annual mean objective. But that blue line at the top shows city centre monitoring specifically in Hope Street. And you can see that it's significantly above the annual mean objective. In fact, it's around 50% higher than the objective level. So we've got a long way to go in terms of bringing nitrogen dioxide down to within the objective at that specific location. And you can see it's a downward trend, but if you were to project that line, it would take a long time before it fell below the objective. So in general, in Glasgow, we don't exceed the particulate levels. We don't exceed the short-term nitrogen dioxide, but within the city centre, we really do have this problem with the nitrogen dioxide annual mean objective. And as a result, over the years, Glasgow's had a number of air quality management areas. So if you fail to meet the objectives, you have to declare an air quality management area. And you can see from this map, the whole city at one point was an air quality management area for particulates. That situation's improved. That air quality management area has been revoked. The Parkhead Cross AQMA was declared again for NO2, but similarly, the situation has improved and that also has been revoked. In fact, although we still have the Byers Road and the Barton Road AQMA and the city centre AQMA, we only really measure exceedances at the moment over the annual mean objective within that city centre area. So that's really the focus of all our attention when it comes to improving air pollution. When a local authority declares an air quality management area, you have to come up with a plan to improve things. And I won't go through all of these actions, but it kind of shows that there has been a lot of actions designed to try to bring us to within the objectives. And I think one of the most important ones that I would bring attention to isn't strictly air quality related, but it does show the changing nature of Glasgow City Centre with the Avenues project. Also, we've had the Spaces for People project over the last year since the pandemic hit, and that also has removed street space from motor vehicles and given it over to cyclists and pedestrians. And that's a trend that you're going to see continue within Glasgow City Centre. All of the Spaces for People programme measures have just been approved to be made permanent, and the Avenues programme is progressing throughout the city centre, really reallocating that street space. But one criticism of the action plan process, and probably a valid criticism, is that it found it hard to really target directly the source of air pollution in cities. And as I said, it tends to be road traffic, which is the major cause now. So in 2015, the Scottish Government launched the Cleaner Air for Scotland strategy, and that really laid the framework for the introduction of low emission zones within cities. It's been a lot of talk. What is a low emission zone? You should all be familiar from what the Energy Savings Trust and Will from Aberdeen have said, but it's basically an area where the most polluting vehicles are restricted from entry. And we are also looking at that Euro 6 standard for diesel vehicles, which is the most appropriate one today, given the nature of the people attending this meeting. And unlike previous Euro standards, this does seem to be giving us that NO2 emissions benefit that we're looking for to enable us to improve air quality within our cities. But if you're looking to impose a low emission zone with the associated costs and inconveniences, you really need to have the information to back that up. So we have, in collaboration with Scottish Environment Protection Agency, done extensive modelling of the city centre area and source apportionment to see exactly what vehicle types are causing the pollution. And it was a bit of a mixed picture, depending on what street you looked at. The bar charts on the right-hand side of this slide show, if you look at the bottom one, the red is buses, and that shows that in certain streets, buses are by far the major contributor to NO2 emissions. But in other streets, other sources can be a major contributor. In the top right-hand side there, you see the bar chart. Yellow indicates diesel cars, but for the purposes of the people at this meeting, the bottom light green shows the emissions from HGVs. So in certain streets, they can be a really significant source of pollution. When we looked at it in a little bit more detail as well, we could see that in certain streets, buses seem to be by far the biggest contributor. So these maps show those streets where cars are the major contributor. That's the streets are shown in black. And the bottom map shows where buses are the major contributor, again shown in black. And it became really obvious to us that in the streets where we have the highest pollution levels, buses were the major contributor. But all vehicle types across the city centre seem to have significant contributions. For example, rigid HGVs average contributions across the modelled area of around 8% of NOx emissions, and Arctic HGVs averaged around 5%. So put together, major contributors to the NOx emissions. And again, when we looked at what kind of low emission zone we would need, we looked at whether a bus-only LEZ would be enough to give us that reduction in emissions that we really needed. So the map on the left-hand side shows those streets where in red where we don't meet the NO2 objective, and on the right it shows if all buses were Euro 6 compliant, would we meet it? And although it's made quite a significant improvement, you can still see that in many streets a bus-only low emission zone wouldn't quite get us there in terms of the objective. So to get the best value from our low emission zone and to get that value as quickly as possible, we introduced a bus-only low emission zone phased in over 5 years, where we would require an increase in the number of compliant bus journeys made through the city centre. We started very modestly. We only required 20% of bus journeys to meet the Euro 6 emission standards, and that came in at the end of 2018. But that was to increase by 20% compliance rate each year until full compliance at the end of 2022. So how has that been performing? Well, this graph shows the 5-year average at Hope Street monitoring site of NO2, and that's shown in black. And the red line shows the 2020 NO2 monthly average. And you can see January, February and March. I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but January, February and March shows it's considerably below the 5-year average. And that's when the first real step change of 40% compliance came in 2020. However, as we all know, something happened at the end of March, and one benefit of that was the NO2 pollution levels really dropped, but it also made it harder for us to assess the ongoing performance of the low emission zone phase 1. But as we began to return to almost normal traffic levels, you can see that so far in 2021, we're really seeing that reduction continue over that long-term trend. And we expect that to become more pronounced as the phasing of the bus-only low emission zone progresses. So similar to Aberdeen, we consulted on various options, and we have come up with a preferred scheme, which again went out to consultation, ended just at the start of this month. We're still waiting on some analysis of that consultation, which we will take to our committee as well. But our preferred scheme covers the whole of the city centre. To the north and to the west of Glasgow city centre, bounded by the M8, bounded by the River Clyde to the south, and Saltmarket and High Street to the east. So it's quite a considerable area that we are looking at for our low emission zone. And again, similar to all the low emission zones in Scotland, we're looking to have it come into effect at the end of May next year, and that will kick off a 1-year grace period before enforcement begins. So we're looking at beginning enforcement of the general low emission zone fairly quickly, and that will start on the 1st of June 2023. But we have given an extra year's grace period for residents, just acknowledging their lack of a choice about how and whether they enter a low emission zone. So vehicles registered to residential properties within the zone will have that extra year. Again, it will apply to all vehicle types, and you know the standards that apply. There's various exemptions. I won't go through these exemptions. These are all national. They'll apply to all of the low emission zones in Scotland. But I would say that Glasgow is not looking to do any local exemptions for any specific vehicle types, although we will have a mechanism where exemptions can be applied for, but those will be in really exceptional circumstances only. We wouldn't be looking to give a vehicle type exemption or give an exemption for any routine commercial or personal transport activities. It would really have to be exceptional circumstances. The penalty charges, as has been discussed, it is a penalty charge. It's not the same as the clean air zones or London ultra low emission zone, where it's a charge to a fee to enter. We are operating on a charge system, and it's really designed to exclude non-compliant vehicles. It won't be a charge that can be absorbed as part of the cost of doing business. And I won't go through this because obviously the Energy Savings Trust have much more information and are much more expert on this kind of thing than I am. And they'll be obviously very helpful and happy to guide you through the funding options that might be available. And I'd just like to say thanks very much for listening. More information on Glasgow's low emission zone, including all of the supporting documentation, the air quality, transport modelling, impact assessments, etc., can all be found on our website. And there is also, for general news on all Scotland's low emission zones, the Scottish Low Emission Zones website. Again, I'd be happy to take any questions in the chat later on, but if you have any questions at all, feel free at any time to contact me through the email address shown there. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thanks, Dom. It's been really interesting to see how the plans for sort of Aberdeen and Glasgow's low emission zones have kind of come together the closer we're getting to them being sort of introduced and enforced, and for Glasgow on the wider scale. But as I said, yep, if you've got any questions for Will and Dom, please do pop them in the chat. I'm now going to pass over to our final speaker, Amir Rauf from CIVRAS, so that's the Clean Vehicle Retrofit Accreditation Scheme. He's going to go over the retrofit solutions that are available for HGVs currently. So over to you, Amir.
Cheers, Heather. Thanks, guys. So my name is Amir Rauf, Programme Manager for Vehicle Retrofit at Energy Saving Trust. So I work primarily on the on the CIVRAS scheme. So I'll just take you through a few slides, give you an overview of what CIVRAS is, and also specifically in regards to HGV and RCV, what the kind of solutions available at the moment are. As obviously it's quite different today than it was maybe even a few years ago. So I'll take you through these. So at the moment, as an operator, the two kind of challenges are always the greenhouse gases and then fuel efficiency. So these kind of go hand in hand, and it's something that Heather touched on as well. So if we're looking at reduced fuel consumption, that will obviously save you money, and in most cases, running cleaner vehicles will also save you money as well. So at the moment, as an operator, you have some options in regards to the low emission zone. You can either completely avoid the zone, which obviously easier said than done for some operators and for some individuals. You can either accept and just pay the charge, or in this case, pay the fine, which obviously doesn't make sense for many. Rearrange the fleets. I know a lot of bus operators have maybe moved some of their cleaner vehicles to operate within the low emission zone, or buys them a little bit of time until they can upgrade the fleets, and many other fleet operators will maybe do the same. You can either buy new compliant vehicles. Again, easier if we're talking cars and we're talking maybe vans, less so if it's, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of buses, coaches and HGVs. And then obviously the option that I'm going to discuss today is obviously retrofit. So I think maybe some of you have probably already had this kind of conversation within, internally to figure out what you need to do. To identify what would be right for retrofit, you typically go through this process. So what is the actual replacement cost for the vehicles that we would have to get up to Euro 6 or Euro 4 petrol level? What is the service life remaining on the vehicles that we currently operate? What are the low emission zone charges, the fees? Is it feasible for us to pay it if we're going in, once or twice a year? If we're going in, 10 times a day, then obviously that's something that would be, quite obvious no. What is the retrofit cost? So just weighing it up against any other options that you have. One of the main reasons why people go towards retrofit is because of the cost compared to replacing, and obviously we have resale value as well there. So the market itself for retrofit suppliers, there needs to be there needs to be a business case for a retrofit supplier to develop a system for a specific type of vehicle. So we obviously have the total number of non-compliant vehicles in the DVLA database, the number of vehicles that enter or typically enter a clear air zone or a low emission zone, which vehicles will be replaced. That again is something that only the operator will know, and then that gives you the kind of pool of vehicles that you'd consider as right for retrofit, and that's where a lot of the considerations for what systems need developed come from. Okay, so SEVRAS itself, the Clean Vehicle Retrofit Accreditation Scheme, these are some of the considerations that a company and a system have to go through before being approved and being listed on our website as a SEVRAS approved company. So we obviously have the supplier requirements, which is just your kind of your usual company requirements. Are there legal entity? Financial information needs to be auditable. I think the main one from that list on the left is warranty provision. So obviously we need these systems to work for at least for the the allotted time for the 2 years warranty time, or there's that extended 5-year warranty time as well. So that needs to be part of the kind of company requirements, adequate QMS system, and then the product requirements are shown here. So obviously they need to reduce pollution, NOx levels, PM levels, PN levels, installation, component conformance, worst case scenario setting, etc. So they basically need to be tested at a test house, for example, like Millbrook, over a representative test cycle to prove that the system is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that's reducing NOx and obviously other pollutants. There is also a requirement for in-service performance and data capture, so monitoring of the system performance, as we don't want to fit and forget. So we want these systems to to be fitted to vehicles, and then a year or so down the line, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, they're still actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. So one of the options, or one of the requirements that SEVRAS puts in is that data loggers are fitted to each of the systems, and then you can go one step further and pay for a subscription, a monthly subscription, which shows you live NOx reduction and live NOx data from these systems, just so that the operator can keep an eye on obviously the performance of the systems and any degradation or deterioration in performance. Okay, so this is just a slide that we use just to highlight, just for people who don't realises the difference, the kind of chasm and difference between Euro 5 and Euro 6. So this is obviously HGV in terms of NOx performance. So from a Euro 5 diesel and a Euro 6, this is obviously the difference is stark. So operating Euro 5s coming from Euro 4s, maybe a little bit better, but it's it's night and day between Euro 4s, Euro 5s, and an actual Euro 6 with the with emissions reduction technology already fitted, and in some cases 100 times worse in terms of NOx, so huge difference. This is an example of the representative test cycles that we use to assess and approve several systems. So if a system is developed for an HGV or an RCV, it's then fitted to said vehicle, taken to Millbrook or Myra or a equivalent test house, and they then run the Civras test cycle. So for a HGV, it would include inner city, urban, extra urban, and for an RCV, obviously a very different cycle. So obviously we have dense urban collection, so we've got a lot of stop starts there. We have rural suburban collection, and we obviously have the transfer phase as well. So these are all tested on test cycles that you'd like to think you'd see in real life, and that gives us a good idea of whether it will actually perform in real world. So currently, as things stand, for HGV and RCV, so refuse collection vehicles, we have these 3 approved suppliers that can offer a retrofit solution. The Prevention and MNOX provide SCRT, so selective catalytic reduction system. So it's an exhaust after treatment system, similar to what you see on a factory Euro 6. And then we have Magtech as well, who offer an electric drivetrain repower. So obviously a big price difference in between the two, but they are both Civras approved. Well, they are all Civras approved suppliers, so you can kind of pick and choose whichever ones make more business sense for you. But the list of approved systems as we are today is a lot longer than it was 2 or 3 years ago, where I think we only had maybe one system approved, and I think that was the Mercedes-Benz Iconic refuse collection vehicle. So that's obviously grown now. We have the Dennis Eagle Elite 2 for refuse collection vehicles, and from memory, I think Proventia and MNOX have both of those. So there's a kind of selection of suppliers. You don't have to go with the one. There's another one that offer a similar system. And for HGVs, obviously, we've got the Mercedes-Benz, Ateco, Axor, Unibog. We've got some DAF systems approved, Renault, Magnums, Scania PCD, some Volvo systems as well, Iveco, MAN, etc. So it's I wouldn't say it's the HGV market itself is fully catered for, but it's a lot better catered for now, as compared to before. So there are definitely options there if retrofit is something that you wanted to go down. So this is just an example. So I got these pictures through, in fact, a couple of days ago now from one of the retrofit suppliers. So obviously this is a construction tipper fitted with a retrofit solution. So you can see obviously a kind of brand spanking new tailpipe there. I'm more bus and coach, so obviously this looks a bit weird to me as well. Because obviously you used to see the tailpipe come out the back of the vehicle. So don't ask me exactly what the kind of components are, but that's obviously, it looks like just a tailpipe there and a kind of stack system. And this is one fitted to a refuse collection vehicle. So you can see there, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that will be the DPF and the SCR systems, and obviously the tailpipe coming out from the back there. So these are some of them. I think MNOX have fitted a number of these in London. So I think this is City of Westminster, Clean Streets. So I can't remember the amount, but I think at least 40 have been fitted with these systems, and they've done a few up and down the country as well out with London. So that's what it looks like once complete. Okay, so the CIVRAS register and approved device list. So the list of approved systems is updated as we go along, as we receive new applications and we approve new systems. We then make the change to the device list and the register and upload it to the website. So you'll be able to find the up-to-date list of approved systems on that link. And I see we will be sharing these slides later on, so you can go through this at your own leisure. But it's basically just a list of approved systems, approved suppliers, and exactly what they have in which category. Okay, so post fitment, it's a case of obviously you get a quotation from your chosen retrofit supplier, you choose to go ahead with it. Once the system is fitted to your vehicle, an installation certificate is produced. It is given to you, the operator of the vehicle. The retrofit supplier themselves fill out a log of systems that they fitted, and they provide that log to the Energy Saving Trust. So our team then collate these logs from all of the retrofit suppliers, and then we send that list on to, for example, TfL, and we upload to the DEFRA CAS checker. So at the moment, I'm not too sure what the situation will be with Aberdeen and Glasgow if they choose to use the same vehicle checker. I don't know, where we are with where they are with the conversation on that. But at the moment, there is always a vehicle for that across the board. So I think with the CASs and Bath, Birmingham and Portsmouth, as you can see here, they obviously, we upload to that vehicle checker. So if you're going to be, charged in Bath using this system, obviously you'll be charged in Birmingham as well. So that's the kind of vehicle of having your approved systems logged onto a kind of national database to avoid being charged. And that's again just an example of the installation certificate and just the log itself that we received from the retrofit suppliers. So that's me. I tried to kind of keep it short because I understand we're under a little bit of time constraint here. So I'll pass over to you, Heather, and in case you want to do questions from here, or can wait once we're ready.
Perfect. Thanks, Amir. And special thanks as well, because I know you're under the weather today. So thanks for powering through and and joining us. So yeah, just as Amir confirmed, like following the webinar, we will send that CIVRAS register of all the approved devices to you all. And as well, someone had asked in the chat if you'll have access to the slides, and the answer is yes. So apologies, I'm just confirming that now. I hope nobody was frantically taking notes throughout, but you'll also receive a recording as well. Okay, so we'll just get started with the Q&A session. If the speakers we'll stop sharing our slides, and then if the speakers can all put their cameras on so we can see you all, that would be great. Fantastic. Okay, just a second. Amir, I can't see you, but I think it's an issue with my Teams. I'm just going to quickly spotlight you and then stop spotlighting. There we go.
Is that better?
Yes, that's better. Okay, so we did actually have a question come in on the chat about exemptions, and I think it was asked just before you covered that in your presentation, Dom. And you did mention some exemptions. It was around showman's vehicles, broadcast vehicles, and medical vehicles. And I think Will and Dom, you've both confirmed that they're exempt. But do you just want to go into a bit more detail about what vehicles are exempt? I will start with Will. Sorry.
Yeah, so there's a series of exemptions set at national level that apply to all low emission zones. So that's obviously emergency service vehicles, blue badge holders, or disabled passengers travelling, or it can be the blue badge holder's vehicle or any vehicle that the blue badge holder is travelling in. Showman vehicles. there are others off the top of my head. Dom might have to come in and rescue me if he's got the slide to hand.
Sorry, I had my microphone off there. Well, yeah, historic vehicles as well is another national exemption which is covered. I think Simon was asking about individual vehicles that might not be covered by those as well, and I think we've both got similar plans within low emission zones that we are not looking. The legislation allows us to look at vehicle type exemptions for short term. Those are time limited by law. We're only allowed to give an exemption for up to a year at a time. But that's really not the type of exemption that we are going to be looking at in Glasgow. We will not be looking at a vehicle type exemption, but we do realise that there might be circumstances that we just haven't thought of where it's a non-compliant vehicle is needed for a really, really specific purpose. It would be a specialist vehicle. It might be a specialist transport vehicle. It could be a normal load type vehicle, which is needed specifically for one purpose. So we'll have to have a mechanism in place for that, but I really don't expect that to be something that is granted on a regular basis by Glasgow. The only other one that has come up in terms of our recent consultation is those vehicles of specialist or historic interest, which don't fall under that historical vehicle category within the national exemptions. And we may look at those if they're in for a show type event, a specific event which needs them to go in. But again, when it comes to exemptions, if it's not on the national list, then I really don't expect there to be many granted within Glasgow.
Yeah, I think in Aberdeen we're on the same thoughts. I suppose just to add, the legislation does allow for a suspension of the LEZ for events. So as Dom says, if there's an event that requires specific types of vehicles to be in the area, then they can be exempt for the duration of that event. I suppose, given we have the harbour just on the periphery of our LEZ, we may have those ad hoc situations where a very specialist vehicle needs to come in. I'm not an expert on what happens at the harbour, but there might be something that needed there. So I think, as I put in the chat, I think we'd have a pragmatic approach for these kind of ad hoc, very specialist vehicles, which it's not possible or not efficient to retrofit.
And for vehicles that are clearly identified on that national list, would they still need to go through some sort of application process to get exemption, or would they just be automatically exempt?
It's a little difficult to say because a lot of the enforcement, the practicalities of enforcement are still being worked through. I would expect that a lot of them will automatically be screened out through being held on a central database. One of the big problems that we have, and Will kind of hinted at it earlier, is around the disabled blue badge holder scheme, where the exemption doesn't apply specifically to the vehicle. It's the blue badge holder, and it's whichever vehicle they travel in. So that obviously creates a little bit of a problem around making sure that those are exempt and that we have the mechanism in place to do that. But there's a lot of work going on with Transport Scotland at the moment to establish that mechanism. The register a primary vehicle seems to be the most likely, and if there is ad hoc journeys by a blue badge holder in another vehicle which isn't a primary registered vehicle, then they may be able to register that vehicle for the purposes of entry to a low emission zone. So there is a little bit of work still to be done in the practicalities, but we expect that all of the exempt vehicles will be easily identified once enforcement begins.
Perfect. And keep sending your questions in through the chat. We are reading it, even though we are in the Q&A. But we've also got some frequently asked questions that we listed as well, because we get asked a lot of questions about the low emission zones and retrofit technology. So I've got one for you, Amir, around the retrofit technologies. Do the retrofit solutions affect vehicles' speed or range or MPG post-install?
No, I mean, a little bit of a difficult one to can answer, because not a huge amount of work has been carried to look at these differences. But in terms of range, speed, etc., nothing like that at all. So it's basically just taking off, if we're talking about the exhaust retrofits, taking off the old exhaust and putting on a new and improved exhaust with an extra with an extra filter to reduce the NOx. So it's not going to adversely affect your vehicle at all. The only thing that it may actually do is, obviously, with these systems, you need AdBlue, and obviously the more kind of AdBlue used, the more NOx obviously reduced. So you will have to obviously kind of budget in for that alongside your fuel costs, but nothing in terms of range or performance of the vehicle or anything, nothing at all like that.
Great, thanks. And one for I guess both Dom and Will again. We can start with Dom this time. Has COVID or the sort of various travel restrictions we've experienced over the past year and a half, has it changed your low emission zone plans in any way? Like, has it influenced or changed them since your original plans?
Yeah, certainly. One of the major things is it slightly delayed the plans. There were legislative delays caused by COVID. Regulations, development of regulations around low emission zones were all delayed, and COVID was a contributing factor to that. We were looking to have the enforcement beginning at the end of next year, end of 2022 in Glasgow. That's been pushed back to June of 2023. So that's the most obvious one. But it's also really affected the development of the low emission zones as well, because we have to take into account that circumstances have quite significantly changed over the last 18 months. And we have to look at what the likely COVID recovery scenarios are, both in terms of transport, whether it fundamentally changes the air quality picture that we'll see in the city centres, and economically, which is the most likely form of economic recovery. And again, economics is tied quite closely into transport levels. So it seems at the moment we've done quite a bit of work in terms of a national approach, looking at likely COVID recovery scenarios and how that impacts on the low emission zone. And those, each of the LEZ cities have looked in a bit more detail and done some modelling of likely COVID recovery scenarios as well, and how that ties into their specific plans for the low emission zone. All of our information on that is available on the website that I mentioned earlier. But yes, that seems most likely at the moment, from our measurements and the modelling, that traffic levels have recovered quite well. I don't know if that's quite the right way to put it, but they've recovered in terms of what they were at the peak of lockdown. There has been changes in the distribution of the traffic flows. We're not seeing as pronounced peaks in traffic in the AM and PM as we used to do, and that might be reflective of still a lot of people have changed work practices. They're not going in specifically to an office at a specific time. We're all mostly, I think, looking at the backgrounds, we're all still sitting at home quite a lot. So that office environment and the change in work practices do have an impact. But overall, our problems are with the long-term objectives, the annual mean nitrogen dioxide, which is less dependent on those peaks in traffic flows and more dependent on the overall levels. As I say, the overall levels seem to have almost recovered to pre-pandemic levels, at least within Glasgow.
Great. Will, do you want to add anything to that?
I'd agree with everything Dom just said. I suppose from an Aberdeen perspective, our plans did slightly change when COVID first hit ourselves, and I think Dundee and Edinburgh were initially pursuing the sort of Glasgow model, where we had a low emission zone that addressed bus emissions first of all, and we were all set to have that in place by the end of 2020, as per what was the government's commitment at the time to have low emission zones in place by 2020. So we were literally just about to push the button, I suppose, on that when COVID hit, and then it was really the immediate impact on the bus industry that changed the thinking there, because as you all know, passenger numbers plummeted when people didn't have anywhere to go, and the bus operators were having a very difficult time of things. So we felt at that point it wasn't really fair to pursue a low emission zone that just affected buses at that point. It was probably more sympathetic to wait and just have the low emission zone come in place, impacting on all vehicles at the same time. And I suppose the only other change from our perspective is the grace period. I think the desire was to have as short a grace period as possible for low emission zones, but again, as I mentioned in the presentation, with the impact of COVID on the bus industry and some of our city centre businesses, we felt that additional year's grace period would be a bit more sympathetic to what these groups were going through, which is why we plumped for the 2-year grace period rather than the minimum one that was set out in the regs and guidance.
Yeah. And then we've had a question through, will there be any coordination across Scotland for a centralised penalty payment or some sort of account, or some sort of centralised system, or will an account or login be required for each zone for issuing penalties? Will, do you want to start? Or Dom, you unmuted quicker than Will.
I'll start. Dom might have to help me out. I think at the moment each city are going to be doing their own enforcement. We have had various discussions with Transport Scotland and the other cities as to how enforcement might be dealt with in the simplest manner. But I think the feeling from all the cities is that them doing our own enforcement is simplest from our point of view.
Yeah, similar. I think we'll all tie into DVLA database, for example, and it's likely that it will have to be a more central system for the blue badge holders database that we all feed into. But in Glasgow, we have our own penalty charge system, back office system already for bus lane enforcement, that kind of thing. And the LEZ will function as an extension of that. So we're looking to do our own.
Perfect. And another one for you, Amir. So what would happen if a retrofitted vehicle sort of breaks down or starts having maintenance issues after install? Do they have to go to a retrofit specialist or every time, or can their regular mechanics help?
So that's where the kind of warranty that comes with the whole package comes into play. So we obviously recommend getting in touch with your retrofit supplier anytime there's any issue that is actually to do with the system itself, and not your own maintenance. If there's something wrong with the vehicle itself that may result in the retrofit system not working as it should, then obviously by all means have a look and see if you can fix. But if it's to do with the system itself, and I know the retrofit suppliers say that if a fix includes touching the system, then they'd prefer if they're asked to obviously come and have a look at the vehicle itself. If it's their own system, they're obviously the main ones to speak to. So you get the 2 years warranty mandatory, but we do ask, and we have asked, Energy Saving Trust have asked for, in terms of the bus emissions abatement retrofit programme, and some work that we've done in Bath and some other work further down south. We do recommend taking out 5 years worth of service, warranty and maintenance, as all suppliers offer that kind of extended warranty. So again, it's well worth the kind of money for that extra peace of mind, especially if you know that you will be operating this vehicle for maybe more than 2 years. I definitely recommend that and use it as you see fit.
That's great. And again, as sort of another one for Dom and Will, it has been identified through the Clean Air for Scotland strategy that transport is sort of the biggest source of air pollution in the cities. But there are other sources as well. Are you aware of any other sort of interventions or programs that your cities are doing to tackle non-transport pollutions in and around the low emission zones?
I'll go first if that's okay. Well, on that one, I did touch on it in the presentation that we all have action plans in terms of air quality. If you have an air quality management area, you have to produce an action plan. We actually have a draft in place or an update for our action plan, which we're expecting it to come into effect next year. And that looks at all kinds of sources within the city centre, just as our previous action plans have as well. Transport is a big focus because it is the main contributor to the exceedances of the objectives that we have, but it is only one source. So a lot of our work is also tied in with the climate plan when it comes to domestic sources, trying to improve the carbon emissions, but as a byproduct of that, it improves the air quality emissions that we are most concerned about. So those co-benefits will progress with the climate plan, will progress with our new air quality action plan. But you mentioned CAFs as well. CAFs has a significant transport section, but it also has sections about all kinds of other areas such as planning policy, domestic sources, and the latest update really does have more of a focus, I would say, on domestic sources of air pollution as well. But all of these things are tying together, and a lot of it is tied together with decarbonisation, not only of the transport fleet, but also of commercial and domestic heating sources as well. And given the soaring price of gas, it's likely to possibly accelerate that process as well.
Yeah, Will, anything to add?
I'm afraid I'm a transport person rather than an air quality person, so I'm not sure what the wider plans are for air quality that are non-transport related. And similar to Glasgow, we do have an air quality action plan that contains a range of actions. The majority of those, similar to what Dom was saying about Glasgow, are transport related. I can send a link onto that, but I'm certainly no expert in terms of the non-transport elements of the plan. What I will say, I suppose, is we recognise, and again, this came across quite strongly in our consultation responses, that the low emission zone itself is not the only transport solution to addressing air quality and carbon reduction. It came across quite strongly that people expect the low emission zone to be accompanied by significant bus and active travel priority to and from and within the city centre, pedestrianisation schemes, etc., that sort of thing. So that's something we, similar to all the cities, have been working on over the last few years with different degrees of success in terms of getting these measures in. But absolutely, we recognise that low emission zone is part of the jigsaw, not the only piece. So we do hope to make significant changes to our city centre in the next 5 years or so to accompany the delivery of the low emission zone.
Great. I don't see anyone typing in the chat, so I will ask one final question. No need to keep people here longer than they would. So it's for Amir. Final question for Amir. Are there many electric conversion or retrofit solutions available? If not, do you expect more to become available in the future?
Well, we have a couple of companies who offer electric conversion, but and we do. I mean, I'd say I probably do expect maybe another couple to come in, because we have had companies contact us in relation to Severas approval, but Severas itself is predominantly about exhaust after treatment, and there are talks within EST and our partner the ZEMO for setting up something specifically for zero emissions technology. So it may be a separate kind of a separate scheme to stand next to Severas, potentially touted as Zevras, zero emissions retrofit accreditation scheme. So with that, I think we do expect a shift at some point, and with that, obviously there'll maybe be some other electric only requirements that we can introduce. But it's difficult to say. You know, there are already a couple of suppliers that can offer it, but due to cost, and I think due to the customers who, you know, so far up to this point have went down the retrofit side, they're looking, you know, they're looking to convert fleets rather than, you know, a single vehicle here and there. So there's obviously a big difference between exhaust retrofit and electric conversion. I think we're looking at maybe between 15 and 20,000 for an exhaust after treatment system, and, you know, close to probably around 100,000 for electric conversion, and that's for obviously HGV and RCV. But I do expect it to. I do expect us to have some more interest in it, and maybe, you know, where there's more interest in it from, you know, operators, from you know, businesses. That's when you'll see a kind of spike in systems being developed, because without an actual business case, you know, these companies, retrofit companies, cannot actually afford to go out there and spend, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands on developing a system that they don't have a guaranteed, response from in terms of business. So it's kind of tricky one to answer, but I expect it to spike as we've seen systems, for example, for coaches. I think there was only maybe one coach system approved a couple of years ago. Mainly because it was kind of the bus operators that were that kind of, you know, took the brunt of the pressure. I think when it comes to cleaning up their fleets, and then as soon as the kind of pressure from government, I think, and the low emission zones, and potentially incorporating coaches as well as other vehicles, I think that spike then happened. And then it resulted in a lot of different, a lot of new systems being tested, developed, approved, and similar for RCVs and HGVs as well. We've seen a spike. The closer we get to, clean air zones and low emission zones, kind of starting up and down the country, we'll kind of see that in terms of solutions being developed.
That's great, thanks. And potentially yet another acronym for us to learn if that goes ahead.
Yeah.
Perfect. I won't keep anyone any longer, but just want to say thanks to everyone for attending and for listening to us. We will send the slides and the recording across to you after this, along with any useful links. And thanks to my speakers, Dom, Will, and Amir, for joining us today. It was really, really informative, really helpful, and thanks very much for your time.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.